Welcome back to Heads and Tails with me, Henry Faber. I'm one of the co-founders at Opidon, and I'm been really buzzed for today's episode. I'm super excited to be here meeting Matt Jones OBE for the first time and have the chance to spend 20 minutes with him. So a little brief update on Matt. Matt is the head teacher of Ark Global Academy, which is a mixed all-through school in London. And alongside his work, he does all sorts of fascinating things. He's the chair of the Southwark Association of Secondary Head Teachers, which addresses issues in local secondary schools and their communities. And he also became exec principal of Brixton's Ark Evelyn Grace Academy back in 2019. Matt founded the Elephant Group, which is a charity that I've known for quite a long time, helping children from underrepresented backgrounds get into top UK universities. And interestingly, on an aside, I believe I'm right in saying that Matt was a footballer before he became a teacher, making 5 league appearances for Southend United. So we can talk about football as much or as little as Matt you like today. Really grateful for you sharing the time. Thank you and welcome to Heads and Tails.
Afternoon, Henry. Thank you very much for having me.
You know that what we do here at Opidon is mentoring obsessed. We're mad about all things mentoring and role modeling. So I wanted to ask you first about mentoring. Did you have a specific mentor? Do you have one now? Any thoughts or perspectives on mentorship would be well received.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in this position if I didn't have numerous mentors. So having one mentor is never enough. I suppose if I'd couch it into 2 sort of fields, firstly, my peer mentors, as you go through your career, there'll be people either just one step ahead of you or had a slightly nuanced experience who would be either formal or informal mentors. And I've had so many of those. The one that resonates most with me, though, are the small group of head teachers who've come together. We came together in about 2008 when we started a leadership journey together. And we were, at the time, we weren't head teachers. We were aspiring head teachers, assistant principals or assistant head teachers. But we were on this headship program that was meant to identify people who want to work in the most challenging contexts and rapidly develop their skills. That was back in 2008, and we are still great friends. Our careers have moved on, but we formed our little head teacher group called Talking Heads. And so we meet up periodically, and 2 of them now are CEOs, another one's an executive principal in their own right. But we still meet to mentor each other informally around the trials and tribulations that we face, or celebrate the successes that we've had. And that's been invaluable in my journey as a leader and a head teacher at school. And so that sustains me to this day. And but if you just ask me who was my most influential mentor, it would be my second head teacher, but it was in my second year of teaching, a guy called Graham Abel. And I started, as you noted in your intro there, that I was a professional footballer. So I went into education as a unqualified teacher. And for some reason, Graham invested a huge amount of time in my development, from going from an unqualified teacher to supporting me to head of subject, head of year, to assistant principal. And he would have, but he's a man of integrity, he would have maybe promoted me to deputy head in his school until I took the decision to leave. Would have promoted me within the school, but I wanted to have a different experience. But what I learned from him was that you can develop knowledge and understanding in all sorts of fields, but why he said he invested in me, he sensed the hunger and a moral purpose, and that would take me beyond the limitations that I may have set for myself or others may have set for me. And he just gave me a disproportionate amount of time for someone within the organization who was relatively low when I entered. But through his development, obviously I've always got promoted to assistant principal. So yeah, he's been the most influential person in my career in education.
Well, there's obviously some key ingredient he spotted, and we're glad he did. If I take you back further, the schoolboy, maybe the pre-football, or maybe it was alongside the football, is there an anecdote from that schooling experience that tells us a bit about you and who the person you became?
Oh, this is a bit naughty because I wouldn't be happy. So it combines both, actually. So I was at Chelsea as a young player, as a schoolboy, and the head of the youth team at the time was an ex-teacher, which was rare in football at that time. And his home was at the end of the road that we had to run past to get to our school fields when we had PE or football club. And he knew that I had PE at a certain time of the day, and it was before he would leave to go to Chelsea. And he would literally stand on the corner of his drive to make sure that when I ran down to the playing fields, because I was, inverted commas, an elite footballer, I should be at the front. And I remember the first time I saw him there and I wasn't at the front, I turned up to training at Chelsea and he just said to me, "You make sure you're at the front of that queue every time I see you on a Thursday morning." And so my lesson from that is that you should always strive to be your best. You shouldn't take an external or extrinsic motivating factor, but it's sometimes helpful to have that.
Amazing. As a Chelsea fan, I want to ask a lot more, but we don't really have time for it. Was it that training facility out near Heathrow? Was it?
So that was Harlington. Yes, we were there, but because I was a schoolboy at the time, we used to go there during the holidays. We used to train literally in Battersea Park on the red grass. And you'll be familiar with a player called Jason Cundy. He was at Chelsea's young lad, so he was a year above. And I met up with him about a couple of years ago doing a presentation at Chelsea Football Club, funny enough. And I'd regaled the story of us having to run from Chelsea Football Club to Battersea Park in the dark. Nothing like they get today, the elite players. You know, they get chauffeured everywhere, etc. And he said that was instructive and formative in his development. You know, it's keeping you grounded and doing the hard yards.
My dad used to take me out to Harlington as a kid, and we would stand on the touchline, and there were all these prefab buildings that the players would come out. I got signatures from all of them, you know, Torre Andre
Wow.
Flo and Vialli and
Wow.
Zola, and it was those kind of mid-90s moments before they moved to Cobham, and you could literally stand on the touchline and like chat to the players as they trained. It was extraordinary. Times have changed. There must have been some tough moments, I'm sure, not just in football, but certainly in your experience as a teacher and a senior leader in the schools you've worked in. Does one particular tough moment stand out? Or how would you reflect on the kind of tougher side of this? And maybe I'll strap in with that. Maybe there's a highlight or a best moment or a peak. I'm sure it's more layered and nuanced than that, but the highs and the lows, where are you going to take us?
So I think my start here at Ark Global Academy, I think the reason I got the job in first instance is that the school wasn't where Ark expected it to be, where the community needed it to be. So coming in back then as an optimistic, I'm still optimistic, but a bushy-eyed, naive head teacher into an environment that was less than conducive to excellent education was a real challenge for me. And that is true of anyone taking over, inverted commas, a transition school. I suppose what the big challenge was my reaction to it and the process we went through, which was a restructure. And so restructuring the whole team to make sure that we had the right level of leadership and people in the correct positions to make the biggest difference. When you go through that process, there's a lot of uncertainty for staff. It's a drain on leadership, a capacity in managing all the process and the emotion around it. People are uncertain of their futures, their jobs are at risk, and everybody feels that their job is at risk. And trying to manage people through that very necessary process was possibly, and I say possibly intentionally, because there are other challenges we face, but I've faced both before and since that, but possibly the most challenging because of the impact it had on the culture in the school at the time, and my lack of experience. We got through it, and I'm glad to say it was absolutely 100% the right thing to do. But at the time, it felt, I wouldn't say lonely, because I had a core group of leaders who were aligned with what we were doing, so we could, support each other. But for the whole community, staff, students, and families, there was a lot of uncertainty. So yeah, they had to buy into some whippersnapper of a head teacher in the first instance, and not all of them did. And that was a real challenge.
That's good. And a high, are there multiple highs? How do you get your kicks these days?
Oh gosh, Henry, there's too many highs. But I'll give you a couple. So we're in Elephant and Castle, and we are in the top 5% if you look at pupil premium, which is an indicator of levels of deprivation in the country for schools. So we're in the top 5%, South London, and I knew that I could get students excited about a rock star rapper, gosh, that's old language, a rapper and or a Premier League footballer. But there were two occasions where I knew that the culture had changed at the academy, which was firstly, I had a young person here who was really into their poetry, inspired by a teacher who helped them explore their ideas through poetry and their experiences through poetry. And this student was called Zareen, and she started up a poetry collective at the school. And so you imagine it's inverted commas tough Southeast London school, and we're doing poetry. That's one thing, but to fill out our hall with 400 to 500 people to watch 16 students perform their poems was something that I didn't think was possible in Southeast London. And so that student, Zareen, took the culture of the school beyond what I thought it potentially could be. And so that was one key moment where I recognized that the school had moved from merely just a safe place, but a place of aspiration and dreams, and to an extent, a level of elitism, which should be there for everybody to have that experience. And that same student, and this is another point, I don't want to use one individual as as an example for all, but she also was our first student to go to Oxbridge. She went to Oxford and graduated from our sixth form. And what I remember is her coming back in September to walking across the playground to meet some teachers and pick up her certificates, etc. And again, I know that if I had a Premier League footballer walk across the playground, there'd be swarms of children over there getting their autograph. It was like a Premier League footballer was walking across our playground. And that's when I knew that it was not only acceptable to be an academic, it was cool to be an academic in our school. And that was a massive transition that we had here. So those two moments through that one individual stand out. But there's one more I want to share, which is kind of encapsulates what I perceive the role of our school is, which is giving young people opportunities that other people don't think they're worthy of or capable of, but succeeding. Was we invested heavily a few years ago in our sports department, our PE team. So I recognize the immense talent that's here. And I headhunted some of the best people, literally some of the best teachers in the country. I met them in a car park. I persuaded them to come to Southeast London to try and get into the national athletics final. And what was so rewarding after lots of investment, both financial and in people, lots of time and effort, our school got to the national athletics final. Only 12 schools get to the national athletics final. Not only did we get to the national athletics final, we finished second to a bunch of, so one school, the school that won, it was a grammar school, but we beat a bunch of other grammar schools and private schools to record the best score that a London school has ever got in that competition. And so why that's an excellent metaphor is that less than 4 years ago, Ark Global Academy was not registered anywhere as being able to compete at elite level sport, school sport. We get to national final and prove that we can. And we got 2 national athletes and one person who plays for England basketball team. Within 4 years, we've created that. And one of them actually is the national record holder for the under 50s triple jump in history of this country. And that's because we've invested, and it shows the potential here. So that hopefully for those people that are listening, that's a good metaphor about the journey that the school is on and our community has been on together.
That's amazing. And I imagine the knock-on effect in the classroom too is really palpable. How do you try and measure that? It must be a magical thing to try and pair up those different worlds of like what's happening on the track and how that permeates into or trickles down into the classroom.
Yeah, I don't want to appear boastful, but I will share this stat with you because we do measure that. Our mission statement is preparing students for university and for them to be leaders in their community. So with that mission statement, we got to track how many of our students go to university, not only go to university, but go to the top elite universities. And so if I was to share with you that approximately 24% of state school students go to the top third universities, in the independent sector, that's around about 63% go to top third universities. 82% of our sixth formers last year went to a top third university. Bearing in mind that they come from a community that, like I said earlier, is representing the top 5% for levels of deprivation. That's something that we're immensely proud of. So we can chart that success, not only on the sports field, in the drama studio, but also with the academics. And that stat of 82%, the year before it was 80%, the year before that it was the high 70s. We've consistently delivered on our mission.
It's a lovely example of how that enrichment piece, whether it's sport or otherwise, like really underpins and creates a bedrock to everything else. And I think
Yeah.
it's lovely for people to hear that. From the sublime to the, what do we say, to the bog standard, I would like to know whether you like reading or watching or listening. How are you getting your content, and what can you recommend for us that you think we should be spending time on?
All of the above.
That's great. You got the time. A lot of people I speak to say,
well,
God,
do you know, I was talking. Yeah, sorry, I was talking to a leader earlier this morning around, having well-being or balance in your life, and we was talking about it, and I'm not sure where my work starts and stops, and where my private life begins. So
it's probably a good thing.
The example of that,
probably a good thing.
yeah, and it means that I'm fulfilled, and that they merge, and so I spend a lot of time reading or getting insights around leadership from various mediums. But I do like reading, and the one book that I read actually before I was serious about leadership and education, but as I still use it as a leadership book, is called Sacred Hoops. And that's by a guy called Phil Jackson. So those who don't know, Phil Jackson was the coach of the Chicago Bulls back in the late 80s, early 90s with Michael Jordan. We still wear his trainers today, not Phil Jackson's, Michael Jordan's. And but the interesting thing is, Michael Jordan was at the Chicago Bulls for 5 years before Phil Jackson arrived, and they didn't win a sausage. They won nothing. And then Phil Jackson turns up, and they win 6 out of 7 NBA titles. He leaves that basketball club. They've not won a title since. And he then goes to the LA Lakers, and I think they won 4 out of 5. Very similar track record. And what he brings out in that book, through one, I'm not a spiritual person, but he talks about spirituality. And I think what he's actually talking about is something bigger than self. And he taps into this concept of where we may be playing basketball, but it's more than basketball. It's about kinship. It's about brotherhood. It's about connecting and feel a sense of belonging and inclusive. And if you know anything about the Chicago Bulls at that time, they were made up of a very diverse group of people, from Dennis Rodman, who's kind of on the edge, to Scottie Pippen, who was a straight up and down player, to this maverick Michael Jordan, who was the elite player. They all felt that they had a role to play in the team. And so what I took from the book is, how do we connect with each other in our work that brings meaning to our life beyond self, but then can be inclusive and respect and value the diverse nature of being a human being and of our community. And so we've used that as a leadership book.
I love that. I hadn't heard of the book, though. The Last Dance, 10 Hours of the Last Dance, it made my COVID experience. And I can say, I think I've watched it twice, and I'm interested to read more about Phil. And I didn't really realize that in some ways that sort of focus on stuff. It makes sense, although a complex one also with Michael Jordan being such a like difficult person, obviously, in the locker room as well, and like quite a complex individual. Great, that's fantastic content for us. I love that. And we're pushing time a little bit, but and I'm keen to keep going. An unpopular opinion. Is there something you're happy to stand on the soapbox and speak loudly about that you think might jar people the wrong way?
I don't know if it's controversial, but there was a statement I use all the time in our community and more broadly with a charity as well. But then there is a more negative flip side, which could be controversial or could upset a few people, which is, so I've got this strong belief, as indicated by the athletics and our succession to top universities, that talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. And so that's not controversial, right? In most quarters. But the controversial bit is, and to an extent, which is, I refuse to accept that disproportionately the talent in the UK resides in private schools. Now, some of my best friends are privately educated. I haven't got a beef with privately educated individuals, but the country is missing out on untapped talent if we only look to those institutions and those places for the talent that's going to help make our country more inclusive, more tolerant, more accepting, more dynamic. And so if you think about Eton, one school that's provided over 50% of our prime ministers, or no, just under 50% of our prime ministers, one school, and that can't be right. And so my controversial view, if it is indeed controversial, is that we need to look more broadly at the talent in our country and provide the opportunity and invest in talent wherever it lies. And I don't mean just in terms of geography. There is some uneven economic development in the UK, which means if you live in the southeast, you're more likely to access great opportunities, but also including gender, ethnicity, and poverty. And so, yeah, it's not controversial. So I'm
No,
going to
no, I
count
think
myself.
I think it's a good provocation, right? It's like how to action that is the hardest bit, but that's what we're many of us in education are trying in some form or other to balance or to find ways through. And last but not least, not just for the teachers out there who we have a lot following this, but for educators more broadly, a piece of advice that stood you well that you'd be happy to share for those in the sector.
I don't know if it's a piece of advice, but it's a way of being, which is always be curious. It's one of the most attractive traits I can find in any individual. The moment you believe you know it all is the moment you know you don't. And so, yeah, just continue to be curious, continue to grow. I hope I'm a better leader now than I was 12, 13 years ago. And I hope to be a better leader tomorrow than I am today. And so if there's one piece of advice, don't believe you know it all. Be curious, keep learning. You would expect that from a head teacher,
No,
right?
it's great. It's a wonderful way to end. You've been a phenomenally eloquent and really, great value guest with a lot of good humor and ease and charm, but also some amazing experiences and learnings backing all that up that I know will be a really valuable resource to everyone who listens to this. So really appreciate from all of us your time in sharing it in a very busy point in the term. And thank you for joining us on Heads and Tails, Matt.
Thank you very much, Henry, for your kind words.